Thank you. So let's get on the same page. We're not going to do a Kahoot this morning, as I said, because we've got the Capture the Flag this afternoon. The other thing we haven't done is a group photo. So just before, when we break for morning tea, can we maybe organise a group photo, have morning tea and then come back, because some people want to leave around lunchtime. The other thing is that this afternoon, I'm looking at running a Capture the Flag. That is optional. If you don't want to be here for that, that's up to you. But the session this morning is to do with log management, so we'll go through that. Can I get people to join the Menti? Got some questions there. So the first question I want to ask you about is that it's now day 5 of the NetSec workshop. What other topics or activities would you have liked to see included in this workshop? I've created it based on my past experience and how I feel you should learn through the progression of that. So is there something I'm missing? Some of you are academia, so some of you are network engineers, technical. Digital forensics. I like that area too. I do have lots of labs on that. Application security, firewall simulator. If possible, discuss about ELK stack. We're doing ELK this morning, but we're not installing. Oh, actually, we are. So we'll look at that when we're doing the grey log. But yes, I've been thinking there is a what's called SELK, Secure ELK Stack. So that's a security focused one. Email security, DNSSEC, firewall configuration and practical. Perform malware attacks and mitigate. Firewall, evil twin attacks, using AI machine learning to secure networks. Blockchain development. That's definitely out of scope for me. SDN and NFV, network function virtualization. That's a different topic. We talk about that in the SDN workshop. TLS for web certificates, cloud security, man-in-the-middle attacks. So we do have a separate open tutorial on TLS. So keep an eye out on the event page. Cryptography, again, where we have the Linux tutorial on the first day, sometimes we replace that with the cryptography. But yes, cryptography is important for security. And there's also a separate open lab for that. DDoS attack, cloud security. Problem with cloud security is that it's Azure, GCP, AWS, something like that. That makes it a little bit more difficult. Load balancing, malware analysis, VPN configuration. I do have a lab for OpenVPN. Haven't got one for WireGuard and Tailscale. So that is a possibility that we can put that in there. SDN, that's a separate workshop. Okay, let's move on to the next question. And that's just to ask about, we've seen this nearly every day. How well did you understand yesterday, the content that was delivered? I really need this person to come out and do the delivery. My voice is getting a bit worn out. This is my 10th day of training. I'm really curious to know who this person is. It's not me. So it's good to see most of you are here. The question times, this is your chance. Ask your questions. Now, I'm happy for you to verbally ask the questions if you want, but it seems like you are happy typing them out here. See if there's any questions. We get started and we get the questions later on. That's fine. There's no questions just yet. We'll come back to it. I'll leave that sitting there. So, rehashing the week so far, can I get you to go to the event page? Just do a refresh of the event page. During the dinner last night, I had a couple of conversations. I tried to remember, I kept saying, I'll add something to the event page. I'll add something to the event page. So I tried to remember what I was adding to the event page. So if you scroll to the bottom of the event page, I mentioned about a lot of people are asking about setting up labs and using the virtual labs and so on like that. So I mentioned there are a few different tools out there. So in regards to the Cisco type of development, there are these tools here. So you've got CML, the Cisco Modeling Labs. And there's a website that you can go to and reserve a virtual lab. And that's free for you to use. Some of you, has anyone heard of Virl? VIRL. It was a tool that got released well over 5, maybe 7 years ago. And it was an upgrade to Packet Tracer. If you've heard of Packet Tracer, it's a network simulation tool from Cisco. Virl is another network simulation tool, but it allowed you to run a lot more powerful systems and it was full features, whereas Packet Tracer is not a full feature set. And you could download that and you would get the images of all the Cisco tools that were available in that. So you'd pay your $200 US for 1 year, download all the images, and then you'd not renew your system and move them over to GNS3. Now you can run it in a cloud instance for free. And also a couple of weeks ago at Cisco Live, they announced an upgrade to that 2.7. So it now allows you to run a little bit more. I don't know if it's in the cloud version yet, but in the paid version, you can get access to it there. The other thing is, down here, I kept mentioning about Container Lab. Have you heard of Container Lab for network simulation? So we know about Docker and other simulations that are out there. What this is going to do is it has as long as you go and get the images, so if you go to Arista, Juniper, MikroTik, you can download the images and not have to pay licensing for those. You still need to pay licensing for Cisco, but you can download those and virtualize those in a container. And this just helps automate that. And there's some sample sites that you can go to, but I've linked to 2 presentations, one from OSNOG, one from NZNOG. They're very much the same presentation. This is from 2024, and then the slide in relation to that. One step further, this guy from Nokia, Tim Raphael, he uses Netbox to document your network, and then using that, he then creates a digital twin of your lab infrastructure using Container Lab. So you document it once and then you give it appropriate tag and it builds a lab for you to then test. So that could be something to look at. Yesterday, someone asked about incident response. There's a 5-part series documentary on YouTube when Google was compromised, and it goes through quite a lot of detail. So go have a look at that. That might give you some ideas there. Scrolling up a bit further, someone had asked about Wazoo and being able to install it. Oh, I thought I had put the links in. I hadn't put the links. So I've done that update. Okay, so I haven't put the links in there, but this link here is going to take you to SOC Fortress, I think it is. Very good overview and configuration of Wazoo and where to download. So just follow that for installation. So we've gone through quite a bit this week. Now we're going to finish off with just the final part of the day, and that is basically being able to gather your logs and use some sort of log management system. Currently, all our logs are being kept locally on systems, which is not going to help when that system gets infected with malware or something goes wrong. So you should always have some way of centralizing that, so that way if you do want to go back and do incident investigation or digital forensics, you have log files to support that. And so that's what our final day is going to look at there. On top of that, we're going to do a lab and try and look at what the syslog delivers for you. Then we're going to do another lab where we basically set up these other logs systems. Now, we've got 3 examples here. The log systems are syslog, rsyslog, and graylog. Depending on your corporate environment or your network environment, they may already have their own logging system in place. So you're going to preference those. There's no right or wrong logging system. There's just ones that have advantages over the other. Some are very basic. Some go to more advanced and have very fast capabilities to store lots of information. So it comes back how busy your network is. So that's what we're going to cover today. And then this afternoon, after lunch, we're going to start doing a capture the flag. In here for the exercises, I'll put a video on how you can access the environment, but I won't put that there until closer to the time. Otherwise, people might start sooner than expected. Everything that we've been doing on and off, if you are interested in, again, people have been asking about running it. I have this set up here called Home Lab. If you click on that, that takes you to another training session I did. When I first joined APNIC, I spent a bit of time automating the setup process of the labs. And so I made that open source. And this talks about that. It's very old at the moment, but essentially you install Ubuntu 18. And then if you go to this GitHub repo, there's a bunch of bash scripts that you can run or clone and run, and depending on what you're trying to achieve. So in this case here, if we want to do segment routing, this is going to set up GNS3, some containers, and be able to then set everything up for you. So it tells you here what it's trying to achieve. So it sets up a desktop, disables auto updates, sets up Docker possibly, if you may not work anymore because I haven't tested it for a while. But this is basically what it does in my steps to automate that. If you're looking at more technical routing, this is what it was aimed at, not so much at the network security labs, unfortunately. But that will help you there. Someone asked about the TLS. Here's a sample of our TLS setup, so you can go and have a look at that. So let's get started. We'll cover just a very quick intro to theory. How many people do logs already? It's a deployed log server. I've got 2. Not many, okay. 3, okay. Essentially, I'm going to talk about what log management process is, why you want to centralize it, and some of the more common ports and the levels and facilities for the logging levels, how much detail you will get in your logs. And it's going to vary depending on what you're trying to log, the vendor software that you're logging information from. So it's always best to consult the documentation. There is no exact recipe, do this, this, and this, and you'll see this, this, and this, because it comes back to how the vendors have created the software, how they do their logging, and then where they share it to. And that is where a lot of artificial intelligence or large language models will be able to help analytically looking at those different logs and combine them together. But if you think about it, essentially any device that has some sort of communication has some form of logging capability. We've got our network infrastructure. By default, they create logs. You've got web servers. They create logs as long as you turn them on. That's one thing I should say. Sometimes they're not turned on by default. And you've got other systems there as well. The big advantage of having logging, it allows you to figure out what's happening with the systems. In the past, a lot of systems used to have it turned off by default, or it was just being sent to the screen output, which isn't going to help because you have to sit in front of the screen and look at it, or otherwise you miss that information. Microsoft's notorious for hiding their logging systems or not having it turned on. You manually have to go and do that. Usually you would go and investigate a problem and then you turn on your logging and try and find a solution to it. Then you turn the logging off. Nowadays, it's expected to have logging most of the time. So we want to basically use it for troubleshooting or debugging. If there is a security issue, someone's gotten into your network or someone has compromised a device, ransomware has been downloaded and infected a machine, you're going to go and use that to try and do a security investigation of some sort. And depending on your organization and what you are doing, there is compliance requirements as well. So PCI, you need to have some sort of logging system in place. If you're contracting to the Department of Defense in the United States, you need to have some sort of logging level in place so you can detect that. And I showed that when we talked about the session analytics on day 3, the different frameworks and what that was expected for that. So when you look at your log management, originally it used to be just the collection of it. So basically your device saves it to its local system and then you remotely log in and go have a look at it. Nowadays, it's a lot more complex than that. So what you're going to need is a mechanism for collection, storage, and then being able to search that for what you want to investigate. Then correlation and output. So think about when we looked at the security onion, there was all these alerts and logs that came in, and even with Suricata and our packet analysis, we manually went through a packet analysis and had to find information. Then we ran it through Suricata and it still had a lot of information, but then when we passed it to EveBox, it correlated it a little bit easier. So being able to make sense of that log information is what makes it important to do. So a lot of log management systems or security event and incident management systems is making that noise of all these events into something logical and easy to understand, to interpret. And so this is where this correlation comes in. And then finally, the output. How is it going to be visualized? So you've got various devices and they're going to be hopefully saving to a centralized logging server. And I've got a spelling mistake there, I just noticed. Or you're going to log it locally, and then you have another system that goes and grabs that. You might have one or more centralized logging systems. So you'll have, depending on how complex your network is, you might have 3 or 4 log collectors, and then that then feeds into the centralized logging server for centralized storage. Then you do some sort of post-processing, and that gives you your output and your search capability and so on. For our HoneyNet project, I gave an example yesterday how we've got that elastic search that allows us to then correlate some of that information. You may also be able to add extra information to it, like threat intelligence. In our security onion, it was just a packet capture that it went through, but then it looked at the IP address and used geolocation as extra metadata to give you more information about that. So it showed that IP address was in Hong Kong or the United States. And based on that geolocation or that extra metadata, you can then determine the threat level as well. Because if you're not having any sort of business relationships with someone in Hong Kong, should you be seeing traffic from that IP address or going to that IP address? Centralized log management basically allows you to gather all the information, hopefully normalize that information, and then allow you to make sense of that information and view that information in a meaningful manner. That's the idea. Otherwise, it's going to be a very manual process if I have to log into every single machine in this room just to find out what's happening. The disadvantage, though, is that there is no standard way of doing logging by those devices. So here, this is what a log looks like for the server Ubuntu operating system. Gives us a timestamp, gives us the name, gives us the protocol, and some information about that. In this case, this is actually the processor, some more information, and again, it's not in any specific details. And because most applications have been told to write to syslog, you're getting information from, say, a web server, you're getting information from a different application, and it's all going to log differently into that. And that's why you try to separate out your different logs if you can. From a SD-WAN controller, the timestamp's not at the front, is it? It's somewhere else. And then you've got the message and notification and so on. So imagine trying to put these two into the one logging system and then trying to make sense of that. You need to then be able to identify what field types they are and how you would break it out and store that information. So that is where artificial intelligence, as people have asked about, would come in handy, because it can do the recognition of these fields and hopefully categorize it correctly. To turn on centralized logging, you will need to consult your vendor documentation, but here are some examples. So for example, in Ubuntu, we would go to the rsyslog.d file and add a configuration file. Doesn't matter what name it is, as long as it's there. And we're essentially saying anything is going to go to this server's IP address on port 514. Now, depending on your vendor equipment, you may not need to tell it the port number, because there is a RFC that has a standard for those port numbers, and we'll see that next. For Cisco, you do logging host and the IP address of the server. For Juniper, you go set system syslog, the host, your IP address, what logs do you want to send, and what level of the information that you want to receive. And we'll look at that shortly. MikroTik, very similar. System logging action add remote equals this. Name equals remote target equals remote. So depending on the standard and the newer editions of that, you're going to have different types of port numbers set as the default. You can modify that port number, obviously, but the defaults are here. So syslog 514 is the default, and it goes over UDP, and it goes via the RFC if you want to read more about that. And these have been allocated by INA. If you want to have some sort of TLS or encryption, then you need to look at the newer standards and port 6514 for doing that. How much information do you want to get out of the system will depend on your logging level. Now, some applications don't support logging level. They'll just dump everything, or you have to do a certain API call to tell it to do it, or configuration setting. But usually with the routers, you're going to have level 6 or 7 through to 0. And essentially the higher you go up, the more noise it's going to make. So think about that. Oh, sorry, the lower you go down, the more noise it's going to make. So you've got to think about the level and how much effort you need to do to find your true issues. So from this, you can see that this is what informational is. So that's level 6. And if we go back here, we can see that we set it to info. So that means it would be level 6. The logging facilities is saying, where are we going to get those logs from to create that event? And you've got different mechanisms for that. Not all systems are going to support that, but you can go have a look at that in more detail. My suggestion is, I'm not going to go into detail of this for the fact that your vendors sometimes don't follow these. So read your vendor documentation and see what they recommend. And there'll be certain recommendations for that. Also, the CIS benchmarks, depending on your equipment, go read that and it will tell you what would be the recommended logging level and the facility to use as well. That's a cheats way of doing it, by the way, but it's the best way. The systems that we've got, some of the common log systems out there are these syslog, rsyslog, Graylog, and Logstash. I haven't heard or used this one, but that's one that you can investigate later. We're going to look at the top 3. I think Logstash was part of the Security Onion. If it wasn't part of the Security Onion, the newer version of Security Onion had Logstash. Now, syslog is open source and free. It does the syslog messages based on the RFC 5424 and RFC 3164. What does that mean? I don't think I've got it documented. 3164, 5424. I don't have it documented. I'll have to add that in there. It allows you to receive the messages in JSON format, which means it's easier for you to manipulate, and it's also a little bit human readable. It can also normalize some of those logs as it goes into your system. It can also be used to hand it over to other resources like message queues and Postgres databases, rather than just being stored in a standard text file. The advantage of that, you can process it a little bit better. If you're getting a lot of logs, then you can send it to things like Elasticsearch, Kafka, and Hadoop. Hadoop is for large data pools, lots of information. Most of the networks I've worked for, we've never had to have a big data lake or anything like that. It is a bit slow using syslog ng. So some people prefer to use rsyslog, which is rocket fast system for log processing. The reason for that, it supports the multi-threading and security, TLS, SSL, and you can also, similar, send it off to faster databases. You can filter on the syslog message so you don't capture everything if you don't want to, and you can do lots of configuration with that, and we'll look at that in the lab shortly. Whereas if you are after a very fast and efficient logging system, so if you've got lots of information coming in at once, Greylog may be the one for you, but it's going to add more complexity to your setup because you have essentially your device is sending messages to Greylog, Greylog sending it to your storage facilities, and then you're interfacing with Greylog with some sort of browser. So it's got a whole heap of whole heap of components that interact with each other. If we were doing our network management and monitoring lab, I would be showing you web demos of most of these at this point. We only have the morning, so we're not going to do the web demos. We're going to go straight into the virtual labs and start deploying and experimenting with that. First up though, I actually want to give you a use case for using logging. So we're going to essentially log into a virtual lab, configure some of the equipment in that virtual lab, and we're going to then try doing a brute force SSH login on that system and then go have a look at a log to see what it looks like. Does that make sense? Similar to what we did, when did I do the SSH one? Yesterday, when we did the Wazoo in the host intrusion detection system. So going back to the event page, can I get you to open up this first exercise, brute force SSH and syslog detection? Oh, any questions, by the way? I went through that very quickly because really it's the last day. You don't want to hear me talking. My voice is starting to get croaky, so it's probably good that I'm not having to talk as much. So I've opened up the link to that virtual lab and you should see at the top the brute force lab. So I'm just going to log in off screen. And I'm going to launch this lab. So we're going to be using some of the tools already from when we did our pen testing. But we're also going to use a new tool called Hydra. Has anyone heard of Hydra? You're shaking your head. So what is it? Tool to what? Not quite. I haven't heard it. I haven't used it for that, but that's not what I was expecting as an answer. So Hydra is a technique to be able to brute force passwords. So rather than analysing data, it's basically you tell it a scope of characters to use for the username and a scope of characters to use for the password, and it will go and try every combination. Or you can create a user list and a password list, and then you can do the attack. Similar to what we saw in that FTP packet capture where there was this 2 usernames, but hundreds of passwords to try. Then we're going to use Nmap as well. So we can have a look if we want. I don't remember using the Nmap in that. So maybe I've added that later. When did I? I'm trying to think when I wrote this. But anyway, so what we're going to do is we've got a simple setup. The setup is going to be simple like this. We've got our attacker machine going through a switch targeting a router. So think about someone's come across your router publicly facing the internet and they're trying to get into it, which is probably a normal scenario. So we're going to start up setting up our syslog server. So our update server, install required software, and so on. So we're going to connect into that server using the SSH command. Password is training or lowercase. Just going to increase my font size, probably just a fraction. Hopefully it's not too bad up the back. And then I'm just going to change my colour to make it easier for people to see. Now, we don't have internet connection at this point. So I've done a lot of this. So if I do the APNIC, the sudo apt get update, it's going to just sit there because we don't have internet connection because it's got some tools there. And so it's got the steps showing you how I install the log file. And we'll go back and do the installation in the other lab shortly. But essentially, I've got it installed so we can do a syslog ng version. And this is what we get from that. So we've got syslog ng working, debugs off, memtrace is off, it supports IPv6, and so on. If you want, you can go have a look at the configuration, but we can go and look at that a bit later on. What we want to do, though, is to allow logs on our internal interface, and so we can go and grab information about that. So what I've done is I basically updated the section where internal is this. It's got nothing in there, and I've said allow UDP. So currently there was no UDP there. I've now said enable listening for UDP. Our last line of that configuration file here actually has an include statement, and it points to this directory. And it's saying that any configuration files that we dump in this directory, please read that as part of the configuration of syslog. Currently, I've changed into that directory and there's no files in there at this point. And this is where you're going to add some setup for your router that we want to get information from. Inside that is this sort of information. So I'll just dump it to screen so it's easier to read. But I'm saying we're going to create a filter for our routers. The facility is going to be local 0, and the log that we're going to get is from the sources. Filter is going to be based on that, and the destination is routers. Inside the destination routers, it's pulling out where to put the actual routers. So it's saying var log apnic in that directory, but do it based on the name of the system, the year, the month, and then give the file name as being the host, so the name of the system, the year, the month, the day, .log. So that way it will become uniquely identifiable. If I don't do that, what's going to happen is that if I have two systems connecting at the one time, they're all going to try and write to the syslog file, and you'll get read-write conflicts because systems are trying to write to it both at the same time, and they're going to say permission denied. So by doing it using a unique setup, that means it's not going to have that conflict, hopefully. Because this is dynamically creating, I need to set the appropriate owner, the group, and the appropriate permissions for the file and the directory that's being created when I say create directory. And then I'm going to put in messages in that at the current. That's essentially, that's what that's doing. And that's created it, and then it's going to put it inside this directory. So if I do a cat now, that is what I get in that file. Again, you can go have a look at the documentation on how to configure this, but this is a workaround for that read-write permissions. So I couldn't just enable it. And we'll see how this impacts what we're doing. The only thing I need to do now is to make this directory. See here where I'm saying go store in this apnic directory. That doesn't exist at this point. If I do a ls var log, there's no apnic directory in this location. So I need to create that first. Similar to when we did the Suricata. If you didn't have the log created, you would get an error message. So I'm just going to go and create that. And I'm going to restart the syslog server so it picks up this new configuration file. And hopefully I've got no errors. And after the restart, I should do a status and get this active running. If I'm going too fast, please stop me. If you're in Zoom, just do a thumbs up so I know that you're ready to continue to the next part. So what we've done is that we've added a configuration file for the group routers to be able to dynamically create a log file based on the host name and date stamp. How's everyone going? We're ready to go on? If I'm going too fast, let me know. I'll stop. But the main thing is that we need to set that up. Otherwise, when our logs come in, we might get errors.
The database and rainbow table are same or different?
Rainbow tables are different.
Different.
Yeah. So rainbow tables are a list of hashes.
Initially, I tries what you do is capturing all username and password and keep the
No, you're not capturing.
It's
You're using those to then
only
push it
using.
again. Yeah.
So what they install is already they have.
Yeah, you've got to create the list of users and you've got to create the list of passwords. So there's tools that will help you like seatbelt and stuff like that. You can dynamically, you can say use this range. Depending on what you're trying to achieve, I use Hydra, Jack the Ripper and things like that. Oh, John the Ripper, sorry.
They had a separate.
And then there's Loft Crack and they're all different types of password crackers. And then there's Hashcat as well.
Oh, that's it.
Yeah, so there's various tools. Depending on what you're trying to achieve, they work better.
Yeah.
I don't know why I change between them, but I do for some reason. It's whatever tool I've got installed because sometimes some versions of Kali have John the Ripper in it. Usually every of them have John the Ripper, so I've been using that lately. But it's not very successful. Okay, so now that we've got the syslog server ready and waiting for configuration files, you need to make sure that it's listening on 514, UDP 514. That's why we said go and do that. And to double check UDP, if I do the netstat-plantu, it shows me here that it's UDP. Now we're going to go to our Juniper router and we're going to enable the logging for that. But we're going to have to set up the interfaces first to get an IP address, and hopefully the router's booted up now. Sometimes it takes a little while for it to boot up, but we'll see how we go. Looks like it has. Just enter into the black screen and press enter. Username is APNIC and it's a complex password. It's got an @ symbol instead of the letter A and a capital T. And hopefully you get to this point here. And so for those people that aren't familiar with Juniper, it uses a hierarchical sort of interface similar to Cisco. And so all I'm saying is go into configure mode, go to the very top of that hierarchy, go into edit mode, and then go down to interfaces. And then I'm saying to set the various interfaces with a description and an IP address. And then I'm saying save that change. So hopefully you don't have issues with latency. And then that's essentially what it's doing. It's just creating a 192.168.30 address, a 172.16 address, and they're point-to-point links because of the /30, and that's it. If everything has done what I expect, when I look at the interfaces, I should now see I've got these set up. Before I make changes to how to log events, I'm going to look at the current configuration for syslog. So I use the show command, configuration system syslog. And currently, I've got set to the emergency one. So thinking back to what I showed before, file messages, any authorization info, and interactive commands, any. So I'm going to go and modify the system configuration to tell it to use a external or remote. I've got to go down here. So I'm saying what port to use, 514, what information to send, any, and I've said the facility override is going to be local 0, and what the source address of the system that's going to be sending the information. And then I'm saying set the user information to any. So this is now going to hopefully start communicating with my syslog server that was on 30.10. So we can see here that it's starting to do the logging already. Message from syslog-d at user APNIC exists, configuration mode exiting, and it started doing the syslog. Unfortunately, I can't scroll back, but I've told it that the syslog server's IP address is 30.10, which is the system that we've got. Now, this is also critical that when you are doing this, that you test the physical connectivity to the logging server, because if you don't have that connectivity, doesn't matter what configuration you've got there, the logs are just going to be lost in the ether. So you need to make sure that you can obviously ping. And I've got my connections. So, yep. So 2 packets sent, 2 packets received. And we can now go have a look at our configuration again. And we should see now here that I've set the remote system and what we want to tell the remote system. On the server where we've got the syslog server installed, we should be able to go into that var log directory. So I'll just arrow up. And if we do a listing of that directory, we now see the IP address of the router. Even though we set it to host name, it's using the IP address. So again, there's some strange things that happen. You need to look at the documentation for your vendor. So it's got the IP address, but it's still a way to identify where you're getting that log from. Inside that, we now get a year. Inside that, you'll get a month. Inside that, you'll get, it's like a hierarchy. And then once we get there, we get to the actual log host name and the timestamp .log. So tomorrow it would be a different timestamp. Can everyone see that? So this is a way of being able to separate out your log files into individual days and so on, which makes it easier for investigation. If you know you get a call this morning, you can start looking at today's log. Whereas if you get a call in 3 days' time, instead of having one big log file that you've got to open and process, it's separated out. And I've just shown you here a simple setup, but basically if we go to the var log directory, there's a nifty tool on Linux systems as well as older DOS systems called tree. You have to install it, but if I do tree, it gives me a nice little graphical output of the hierarchy. So you can see here going down. To see the contents of that file, I've got a find command there, or you can just use the cat and the path to do it. Any questions about that? How many people have done a password spray attack? I have. But anyone tried to do a brute force password attack before? Sometimes you might have done it. If you haven't, that's what we're going to do next. So we're basically going to use a tool called Hydra. So we're going to create a list of usernames and passwords. We're then going to install the required software, but we've got no internet connection, so you won't be able to do that. And then we're going to perform a brute force against SSH. So most routers have SSH enabled, so we're going to try and get into that system. Now, normally I get you to go and research this, so you'll have to do this outside of the lab. But this is part of that reconnaissance. Remember day 1 and day 2, we talked about the attack life cycle. I'm going to try and get a listing of potential users for your organization. But in vendor documentation, there are common usernames or default usernames, isn't there? So it's quite easy to get those. So I'm just going to open this up in a new window. This is a GitHub repo showing a listing of common SSH usernames based on different types of data breaches and so on. So lately, you might recognize we've got root here, we've got nobody, we've got things like admin, administrator, Apache. So there's about 100 or so in here. And as I've already said, that if you're doing a lot of pen testing, being able to create a list that is very efficient means that you're going to get into the system a lot quicker. So there are going to be some here that probably won't be worth trying because it's not going to achieve much. So you would remove that from your list. And that's where we're going to have a look at here. The same sort of thing. Research passwords. Try and get a listing of default passwords for these types of systems. What's the default password for a Juniper setup? Is it admin? Is it admin as the password? Something like that. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to our directory, and this is going to be in our home directory. I've already started to do some of this for you. So I've already downloaded that list that we went and had a look at on GitHub for usernames. So I'm going to use that, and inside that list, there's 55 usernames. So the more usernames you have and the more passwords you have, the more combinations you're going to need to do when you do the brute force attack, which means that it's going to take longer to discover the combination, but it also means that you're making more noise, meaning that there's going to be more alerts created. So you want to try and fine tune this. So I'll give examples a bit later on how you might want to do that. So here's an example where I'm saying these names are probably not going to be worth using in my attack. So anything with Deb, bin, Aura, pub, shut, halt, BB, D, G, W. And so I'm saying, please use the regular expression for those. and it's going to show me a listing of everything with that in there. So what I can do is I always run it to see what I get, and then I use the -v lowercase to exclude that list. So now if I exclude that, it's going to mean that any of these words that just showed up here, I'm not going to use in my attack. And so I'm saying, do the same output, but this time save it to this text file. And so it's taken it from a list of 55 potential names to 27 potential usernames. So it means it's a smaller list. I'll wait until everyone gets up to there. So I'm doing this on the syslog server rather than having it extra system. So now we've got a list, hopefully, seeing how people are going with this. All good? How's everyone up the back? Looks like I need to bring some JD to class. I'd get a little bit more reaction maybe. How do you find the IP address? Okay, so you mustn't have. So go back to step 1. So have you created that? So go back up. Up, 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 up. Go into that directory. So click on that. See how you haven't created that file yet. So now create.
Add this one too.
Yeah. You needed training. Training, all lowercase.
This one, right?
Yep. Yep. Now go down and make that directory. Oh, you've already got the directory made, so restart.
Oh, that restart please.
Q. Just Q there. If you don't see the log file in the APNIC, in the var log APNIC directory, it usually means that you haven't done that router conf file and restarted the syslog server. So it's more of a custom one. So if you don't see it there, it's then pointing at syslog. So you need to just go to var log syslog.log and look at the information there. Whereas I'm pulling it out into a separate log. So it's easier for us to find. And because we're only using one system, we won't get that permissions, but yeah. To use Hydra, Hydra is a password brute forcing tool. We're going to use Hydra with some switches. So you've got -L. -L is where you only want to use one login or list password. And so you would just type that. If it's a capital L, it means that you're using an extra file that has a list of one or more items in that. If I wanted to try a null password, that means an empty password, I use the -EN because there's a lot of systems out there that have a username, but there's no passwords on it. I can also do multi-threaded. So you do a -T and the amount of threads you want to create. The more threads you have, the more noise you're going to make. Now, I thought I can make this run a bit faster by increasing the number, and I tested it a few times. And I got it up to 10 and 11. I thought, oh yeah, that works fine. Then I restarted the lab and it crashed the lab. So I think I set the threads now to a low number because I couldn't get it to run, but I could get it to do it in a couple of minutes. This time it's going to be a bit slower. Then the protocol that you're going to attack, in this case, we're attacking the SSH protocol. So it then knows how to do it in that format. And then the IP address that you're trying to brute force. So we're going to use that SSH usernames, the whole 55 this time, but I was just demonstrating that you would want to compress it there. And I'm telling it to use that as my list and then try and get into this system here. So it's going to be attacking. Now, it probably won't find a match from memory, but it's going to hopefully create a lot of noise and we can go investigate that noise in the syslog. So it's doing one task per server, overall one task, 55 login tries, and it's trying it, those with those, telling me 55 logins with one password. So the password I've said is blank. So 0 passwords were found. So if I wanted to use a password list, I could do a -P and type in a password, or a -P for a extra text file with a listing of passwords. So now what we've got is our log file is being created, definitely being created. And if we go and have a look in our log file, just going to do a tail output. We should now be able to see that we've got a received disconnect from 10 pre-auth, but we've got this SSHD login failed for user web sphere, received disconnect, login failed for user www data, and so on. So there's a whole heap of alerts in our syslog. That's not changing any settings on the router at all, apart from enabling logging. So this is a simple win to be able to detect brute force attacks against a Juniper router. Turn on your logging and then go investigate it. Just turning on your logging and not investigating, it's not going to help you. To look at only the failed attempts, we can see here all of the failed attempts. So I've just did an abbreviation. Just did this find again for that particular file, passed it to cat, and then I did a search for failed. This is going to take a lot longer, but we can also, as I said, use our Hydra to attack using the small database for both the login and password. And it will use those combinations. It will take a lot longer to complete, but so in this case here, it's now trying 729 login tries. And I did set the threads higher, but sometimes it crashes. So just be careful about that. I'm just going to let that run in the background. If you are wanting to do a different type of attack using Nmap. We briefly looked at the Nmap scripting engine on day 2 when we did the pen testing. And we looked at getting information about the SMB shares, the Windows shares. Inside Nmap, you also have the option to use a brute force attack. So you've got this SSH brute force using Nmap. And we're going to use the same sort of thing. Hopefully it doesn't crash my server. But I'm just going to go File, New tab, SSH APNIC at 192.168.30.10. Password is training. I'm just opening up a new window just to speed things up. And all I'm saying is use Nmap to, and be careful when you paste it in, looks like it's dropped out a full stop. So Nmap 192.168.30.3 is our router, the Juniper router. Port 22, use the script SSH brute. And the arguments I'm going to tell SSH brute about is the user database. And I've mentioned this small text file. The password database is this text file. And so it's now using Nmap to do the similar thing as what we're doing with Hydra. The thing I like about Nmap, it actually shows me what it's trying, the combination. So you get what's happening, whereas if we go back to the Hydra, it just doesn't give any output just as easily. It's just saying the status is how much time before it tries. So I've done 87 tries, 183 tries, and it just gives me. But ultimately, if we go and have a look at our syslog file, it's going to show all these failed SSH authentication. And if you're using Suricata or Snort or some intrusion detection system, it should then alert on that. The problem would be, is your router, where is the sensor located? Is it behind your router or is it in front of your router? So if it's behind the router and I'm getting attacked from the public internet, it may not see it. So some people say, oh, but why didn't my intrusion detection system pick it up? Because the traffic never hit it. Because of where it's, if it's an edge router and it's publicly facing and there's no firewall or intrusion detection system in there, how is it going to know about it? So it needs to see the traffic to alert on the traffic. Any questions? This is going to take a little while. We've still got another 10 minutes on that one. Yours finished? Yeah, that's what I said. Sometimes with my threads, it would crash and take longer than what it should. If you not today, but if you wanted to go do this lab again, try it with the 55 and see how much longer it takes. And you'll figure out why I trimmed it down. So the advantage of using the Nmap, you can see what it's trying to do. So it's using the same password and then it's using different usernames as the combination. And then it changes to the next one in the list. That's essentially what a brute force is doing. Does everyone now know what a brute force is when we talk about it? Good demo. I'm going to stop my Hydra because I know I'm not going to get the information there, but I can resume it with Hydra -R if I want. So there is that option. And so if we go have a look at our failed logins, we can now see the different attacks that are coming. So it's showing me that failed password, failed login for this user, failed password. So we can see we're definitely under attack. And you would look at the timestamp. You can see in the timestamp that 59, they're very close to each other. And you would alert on that. Any questions? I'm just going to close that lab down. You're welcome to save it or go back to it tomorrow or another time. And I'm going to open up the log management lab. This log management lab, there's a lot of things going on for this one lab. And when we built the virtual machine, the installs weren't that big. If we try to do everything at the one time, it could break. So what you can do, you're welcome to do the syslog and rsyslog together, but restart the lab to do the grey log. We're not going to have time to do the 3 different log systems. So we've had a look at the syslog briefly. It was already installed for you and we looked at how we can configure that. We can either look at syslog and greylog or we can look at rsyslog and greylog. I'll get you, let's just do syslog because I've already started talking about that unless people want to do, who wants to do rsyslog? Raise your hand. 1, 2 people, 3, 4. Who wants to do syslog? 1. Oh, it looks like the vote's against us. So it's going to be rsyslog. Just need to wait for everything to start up. While that's starting up, I'll go back to the Menti page and see if there's any questions. So in regards to Shodan detecting our public-facing honeypot, what you could try and do is email Shodan and ask what would be the exclusion addresses. So you can add that to not allow that connection to that, or you can ask them to remove your honeypot from that. What are the certifications you suggest and recommend we should focus on if you want to focus on IT security, cybersecurity, and pen testing? I knew that was something I needed to add last night. There is a great listing. I'll come back to that one. I'll add that there. But there is someone has spent a lot of time building up this big poster that shows all the different types of cybersecurity qualifications and where in your career you should do it and what the certification focuses on. So in regards to if you're a beginner, you do this. If you're interested in red teaming, if you're a beginner and interested in blue teaming, you do this qualification. So I'll grab that and show that in the break. I'm very new to this field. I got a broad idea from this workshop. Can you tell me some points to start my journey? And I was going to cover that this afternoon, but at the very first session, I've got this link here, the SOC Level 1 training. I recommend you do that. It's free. You create a free account. It shows you how to set up an open VPN connection to their systems. You connect to their systems and you follow along with their labs. And it exposes you very much like this lab, this workshop has, to different components, the frameworks, the seams, I don't think it does much of the pen testing. But then I'll add a link to this one here, and this is where I've just done a search for web testing, free labs, and you've got all these other types of, so you've got this pen testing fundamentals lab, and that will give you some extra there. Try Hack the Box is another one as well. How to build a virtual lab for experiment tools in Kali Linux. Is it safe to use a personal laptop with a VirtualBox? Yeah, I've done that. I'll stick with that. And I think I've put a link in there already for you. How to become an APNIC CT community trainer. On the APNIC Academy website, actually, yes, I think it's there. Under community experts, go to community trainers, and at the top is our current vacancies and contact us. So at various times we will open up applications for becoming a community trainer. If it's closed at the moment, feel free to send an email asking when will it open or express your interest. And you might have a special skill set that we don't have, so we still will go through the interview process. But to become a community trainer, there's an interview process, usually starts off with a phone interview just to check your fit with the organisation, what you understand about APNIC and your English level, because most of our workshops are done in English. Some of our localised workshops are done in local language, so that could work out well when we start doing regional training. And then we look at your presentation and your ability to take technical terms and present those technical terms. And so that might be 1 or 2 extra demos that you have to do, and then there's a final interview with all the management. That's the process to become a community trainer. Which is easier, syslog server? It depends on what you want to do. If you've got the beefy box, Elasticsearch and Greylog is probably what I would go for, because that allows you to build for future traffic. And if you get under an attack, that's one of the worst things, is if you get hit with a really bad attack, you're going to get all these events and your syslog server can't handle it. So always, I didn't put in here about a formula, but look at your vendor documentation, and it should give you a formula to calculate how many logs you should be expecting to receive and what your log server should be based on sizing. How to access DarkLab, for the purpose of education. Well, depending on your browser, you've got this browser here, allows me to go straight into new private window for Tor. And that allows me to, dark web is usually on what's called the Onion Router network. And the Onion Router network is a little bit more complex in regards to your system will become part of the Onion router network when you start using it. So you might be breaching your corporate policy if you start browsing that. The other thing is that you may want to use a tool called Tails. Tails allows you to Tor, anonymizer, something. But you create a bootable USB, you plug it into a system, you boot off that, and it's a completely separate bootable Linux operating system with a browser that allows you to do that. And that way you're not worrying about your own system being compromised. I would then create a VPN somewhere, so that way it's not your IP that's going to be used as an Onion router node, and then you start browsing. The difference is that when we look at web pages, they all end in .htm, .html, true? Or it's a .com website that you're going to. Onion environment uses .onion. So you need to find your search engine that supports .onion. So you can start by using the normal internet and say, give me a listing of search engines in .onion domains. And you'll get a listing there. So Facebook has a .onion website. Some of the legitimate vendors will have a .onion website. And then from there you start browsing. Hopefully my routers have finished booting. Okay, so we're going to jump ahead straight to the rsyslog. So we'll just do part 2 and 3 of this lab environment. We're not going to do everything. So we'll start the syslog setup. By then, it will probably be about morning tea time. And then after morning tea, we'll come back for the Greylog setup. And depending on the speed of the install, someone ran this lab last week or 2 weeks ago, and they were in Laos, I think it was. It took an hour for the Greylog server to install. So hopefully it's going to be quicker for us here, but we'll wait and see. So I'm going to go to the part 2, set up our syslog, rsyslog server. Same sort of process. It's on a Ubuntu system. We're going to update the software, install the software, configure it, and then go to a device and configure logging on that device. This one is looking at a Cisco device, and then we're going to view the logs based on that. The lab that we did for our brute force is very similar to what's here. Only difference was I removed a lot of the routers from the brute force one and gave it no internet connection. I'll just set up my terminal window so it's easier for people to see what I'm doing. So make sure that you're logged into the Group 30 environment. That's going to be our syslog server. And then from there, you can start doing the installation. So just talk you through it briefly. But because we haven't done the syslog setup, we don't need to stop the service, so we can go straight down to updating the software. We update our software. This one command is going to update and install the syslog software. It's very easy to install on a Ubuntu system. It's got it in the normal repo. And so you just mention syslog to install, and it goes, gets the dependencies and everything and installs it for you. And then it's just a matter of checking that it installed correctly and check the status. Once that's done, we're going to go start looking at the configuration file. Inside the configuration file, we need to set up things like what protocols we're going to listen on. And that's what we're allowing there. We're saying allow both UDP and TCP connections. And that's what we're saying here. I am UDP, I am TCP. So we add that to our configuration system and then we pull it out. You're welcome to use VI or Nano to edit that. But from my point of view, I've put the sed commands for a search and replace to add it there to make sure you get it in the right spot. Once we've got that, we're going to go have a look at our config and run our syslog using that config that we created. And it's going to do a test run, and that's what this -N1 does. It's trying to check for any syntax errors. So if it made a mistake during that editing, we get alerted about that. We restart the syslog and we go check that our server is now listening for connections on TCP and UDP for our 514 for the syslog format. And that's it. That's our syslog server setup. We then go to our device and we start logging on the device. And I've talked about that from a Juniper point of view. Cisco, I'm assuming some of you have already done that, set up logging, so I won't go through that process either. Once that's configured, then it's just a matter of going to have a look at the other logs on the system. Then we're going to add our Ubuntu system to it, and we're going to modify some directives for doing that. But I'll let you go ahead and get that. At a minimum, I want you to set up rsyslog, then set up the Cisco device to talk to the centralized rsyslog server. Then we'll look at adding a new system shortly. I won't talk anymore. I'll let you go do that lab. I'll build it up front here as well. So I've gotten to the point of my Cisco device is connected to my central logging server, and I'm just looking at the syslog file. Anyone see a problem with just using the syslog file? It gets mashed into one big long file, unlike what we did with the other logging system where we broke it out into individual. If you've gotten to that point, I probably would like to break a little bit early so we can get time to do the photo out the front and then go to morning tea. When we get back, we will add another system to the syslog and then we'll move on to the grey log. For the person who asked about the certification, if you go to the APNIC event page again, do a refresh, at the very bottom of that page, I've added another link, and it's a certificate security roadmap. There's about 470 different certifications in there. Over here in the green is your normal Cisco, Juniper type equipment exams, some other type of exams more for vCenter and data center. As we move further across, there's more specific to security, and going up are the complexities of those or more advanced topics. It doesn't look very good on this screen, but you can link to it yourself. But I think it's a nice little tool, and if you want to find out about a particular one, if you highlight it, it actually gives you the details and a link to go find out more. So it's a great resource. So I'm just waiting for a few more people to come back. There's another question in the Menti that I want to answer about logs. So in regards to the question about log rotation, is that enabled by default in syslog NG? No, it's not enabled by default. So normally when you're looking at syslog is probably only going to collect a few logs at a time. And so it doesn't fill up very quickly by default unless you get attacked or something like that. So there is no log rotation. You have to do it manually. So there is a tool that you can use called Log Rotate. The disadvantage of using the Log Rotate is that it means you're going to have to stop and restart the syslog server. The other option is, like I did in the brute force one, you set up that custom config per your group of routers, so it logs to a different file with a timestamp there. If you are interested in looking at that, do a refresh of the page. I'm waiting for it to do a refresh of the page. Still hasn't done a refresh of the page. And if you have a look, I've put in the admin guide for syslog as a link in the resources for the session that we're doing now. So if you click on that, that talks about how to configure log rotation. And so what you would need to do is basically set up some sort of log rotation. If you just want to do a simple log rotate, just run it by itself and it'll ask you some questions. Or you can set it up as a cron job. And if you do it as a cron job, inside the the log rotate.d, you can add a syslog.ng file, similar to what we did with the brute force. And depending on what logs you've got, so if I'm saying syslog-ng, outgoing log, incoming log, I'm going to do very similar things. So I'm going to say ignore messages, rotate, I want 3 log files. I want it to be compressed, and I want this particular log file to be 50 megs in size. So that will take 150 meg in size. And I want it to be daily. And then because I'm creating it, I'm setting the permissions for that. And then to rotate the log, I'd need to end the processor so it's not locked, that file. And then that should rotate it. And then it will start up again. And so you run it as a cron job. Similar for any other sort of logs that you have, I've just changed the sizing of that. Whereas if you want to do it based on the destination, like what I've done, see how I grab this host year, month, day type scenario? That's how you could build it out. And I've given you an example of that in that SSH brute force one. And then there's enabling a log store, which is a little bit differently, but go have a look at the admin guide. The documentation should help you with that. And as I said, by default, no, it doesn't enable the log rotation. Tell us if you have any free tools like Mentimeter and Kahoot. There's free tools there. I've been talking about free and open source tools all week, depending on what you're after. So there are, I'm not too sure, but yes, I'll tell you as best as I can. How to run the cron job for syslog server. So for the cron job for syslog server, if you wanted to do that, you would need to have some sort of cron set up like this. So in the config, you're specifying how often you want it to restart. 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 11 o'clock. That's all the fields there. What program you want to run, what config you're going to use, and then get rid of all the error messages. Don't display them to screen. That's a simple setup there. But I haven't been talking about cron jobs because I don't think many people, if you go back to the basic Linux course, I think we talk about cron jobs in there. So you can go have a look at that. But that would be a basic setup. So before the break, we got to the point of having our log file up and running. Our syslog server up and running, and we connected our Cisco device to that syslog, and it's running in the background as it is. We then went off and let that run and just continue to run. And I'm just doing a tail of the last commands or last sections of that. So I've used the tail -F, which means just keep showing it until I press Control-C. So I'm going to go Control-C, and we're going to add a second system. Now, this is something that I highly recommend you do, because sometimes when you are setting up your logging servers, example, the syslog, I figured out that I had an issue with the read-write because two different systems were trying to write to the one file, and it causes a lock error. So by at least adding another system to your logging, you get the check that makes sure there's no issues. So that's what we're going to do here. We're going to basically add a template into our global directives to basically add extra information. So if we go to this particular file and jump directly down to line 26, what we can do is in our global directives area, we can set up what we're expecting from our logging. So above that, we're going to create this template. And the template is saying any incoming logs, we're going to start creating a unique log for that. And the unique log is going to be the host name and the program that is creating that log. So if you've got a system with multiple applications creating various logs, it gets grouped into that folder under its application name. So this is where I'm pulling it out of the default syslog file. So it's always a good idea to do that. So I do a Control-O to save that, Control-X to exit, and I need to restart my system. Before I restart it, I'm going to do an error or syntax check, and it should come back and say end of configuration run by if there's no errors. So I'm going to restart it and then wait a couple of seconds and do a status, and it should come back as active running. We're going to set up a new server to add information to this server. So we're going to open up a new tab. And I'm on H1, which is the Ubuntu desktop. And I'm going to tell it to connect to system number 4. And let's say this is my RPKI server. So you should see RPKI Prover, and I'm going to install the required software for logging on this system. So at the moment, I'm just going to install rsyslog just like what I did on the original server. And that's going to install both the server and the client component. So that's what I'm doing here. So that's now installed. And then I'm going to create in the syslog server directory, if I can scroll down a bit further, this big, long, complex, it's probably going to be easier for me to paste it there, but I'm going to say how we're going to create our logs or send information. So there's a lot more complexity here, and we can go and look in the admin guide to create or have a look what's happening here. But essentially what I'm saying is we're going to create this file and we're going to dump it in the rsyslog.d directory for this system. This is similar to what we did with the brute force, where I put it in the syslog.d directory, syslog-ng.d directory. So what I'm saying here is that I'm going to buffer the messages into my disk queue just in case I get too much. But my maximum disk space is going to be 1 gig in size. If I'm going to be shutting this system down, I want to save that queue so that I don't lose information. And if something goes wrong, do a retry count of 1. Otherwise, it's going to have other issues and keep trying to retry and might use up resources. Then I'm setting up my remote connection to my rsyslog collection server, which is 192.168.30.10:514. I've also said to preserve the fully qualified domain name to make it easy to track back to here. Once I've done that, we're going to, I've made a mistake there, so Control Z. Control C. I was just going to show you what it looked like for that configuration, but we've already got that there. I'm just going to check the syntax and make sure there's no errors before I restart this local system rsyslog server. And hopefully it comes back as running. And give it a few seconds. If you do this too early, it may not work, but we'll see what we get. So I've basically changed into that var log directory, and I've done a tree, and we can see here the RPKI prover has now got a rsyslog, a systemd, and a sudo log. So there's 3 different applications running on that one server. And it's now broken it out into those different applications. So that will make it easier to do troubleshooting rather than just dumping everything straight into the syslog. Does everyone see that? You've got a question? And to see what's inside those folders, you can just do I've just said, do a find command for anything that ends in log and then display the output. And so we can see what it's doing. But I really do like the tree command. Makes it so much easier. Oh, that's because I didn't do a pseudo tree. So I need to do the pseudo tree to see it because it's running under the permission of rsyslog. Either that or I add my normal user to that. Now, if you come from a Windows domain environment, you'll need to think about which logging systems you want. It has its logging servers. You can use an SQL database and build it out. It's going to be different for each network based on what your operating environment is, what devices you have, and then what would be your preferred collection method and logging method that you want. There is no right or wrong way of doing it. Now, I can't remember whether I always tend to restart it just before I start the Greylog installation, so that way we don't get a conflict. Because in theory, it's not going to use the same port as UDP 514 because it's not using the standard syslog, but it's always a good idea to just do a fresh install on a system that hasn't already got other software running. So I'm just going to restart my lab. And because we've got the routers running in the background, the Cisco and Juniper routers, it's a good idea to give it time to start up. But we can start the installation, but we won't be able to do the router configs. It shouldn't take long. Are you talking about for rsyslog or are you talking about? Yeah, it should do it straight away. So you did it on the, that's on the wrong system. You need to go back to here and do, there. So the main thing to be aware of is that you've got two different Linux servers. You've got your syslog, rsyslog collector, and then you've got the client sending the logs there. So if you try to run the tree command and it says command not found, you're on the client. You need to go to the server, which is the collector of the logs, and run those commands in there. So that's why you won't see it. So this morning, we've gone through and set up, or didn't set up syslog, but we configured a grouping for routers on a syslog server, and we connected a Juniper router to it and collected central logs. We then set up our syslog server, and we connected a Cisco router to it, and we connected a Unix or a Ubuntu system to that logging server. Now we're going to have a look at Greylog, and Greylog is a lot more complex. It's a lot more moving parts. We saw when we installed rsyslog, it was just app install rsyslog, and it installed both components, server and client, and it stored it in a simple text format, didn't it? So if you are getting lots of traffic hitting your servers, or you've got hundreds of machines all trying to log to that one system, they won't cope because there's a lot of packets coming in and it then needs to write it to disk. And this is where we're going to go for a more beefy server that requires you to install things like the MongoDB, a database server, and Elasticsearch, so you can now index those alerts, those logs, and get information out of those. And so that's what we're going to be doing, is configuring that information. The other thing that is required in our past installs, all we've done is say, go to the repo and get the latest list of available software. And we did an install. With Greylog, it expects to have the latest SSL certificates and a few other dependencies. And so we're going to have to actually make sure we've done all the updates and patches to the server. And so that's what this command's doing here. Now, if you want, you can watch what I'm doing up here. Then I'll stop and let you do it, and then we'll continue there. That way I keep us on track, because I've only got just before lunch to do that. But the process is similar. If you've done updates, install of software, most of my commands are there. If you don't understand the commands, ask me, and I'll try and explain it to you. The next stage is to get the required software for running our systems. And the first thing we need to do is to update our software that is enabling us to do SSL connections. So that's why we had to do the dist upgrade to get the latest certificates. Then we're going to add in the HTTPS component. It does require Java runtime to work for some of this. So that is a problem. The less command, we've been using it on and off for the past week. It allows you to scroll up and down one page at a time for output from a file. And then we've got these password generator and a UUID runtime. So we're going to allow those to install. Once that's installed, we're going to then install a database system. One of the more common database systems is MongoDB. Now, normally in the past, we would use these commands direct from the installation guide. But with security the way it is and paranoia, they no longer trust the self-signed GPG key. So see how we've got this APT key? Ubuntu doesn't trust that anymore. So we've got to scroll down and add it this way. So we're going to say, go to the key server that's run by Ubuntu and look for this particular key, rather than download one from MongoDB and install it. And hopefully it should see that it's got MongoDB 4.2 release signing key. So they've uploaded that there. The way I found that was basically when I started getting the errors, I just started researching it and I found that what that number was. Can't quite remember how I got it. But now that we've got that, we're going to add our repo. So first up, we're going to remove anything to do with our 4 if it's in the list. If it's not there, then we're going to add ours there. Now, I've put the remove in because sometimes people don't read the error message and go straight through the list. You've got to skip this section here. So where it's got there has been an update, you skip from that until you get down to the next red section. Use these commands instead. I press enter on that, and essentially what I'm doing is saying where I can download the software from, a trusted source. Now that I've got that set up, I tell it to go out and get a list of available software, and then I tell it to go install the MongoDB and the policy kit. So this is a lot more complex than the other logging servers. More steps involved. And you'll also need to refer to the documentation to find out what the hardware or minimum hardware requirements are to run each of these software. But it also means that what I can do is I can have multiple systems running different parts of this. So I can have the MongoDB on one system, and then I can put Graylog on another and tell it to talk to that server. Obviously, I need a fast connection between the two. Now I've done that, just like what we did with other systems, we're going to tell it to reload that at start. So go and grab the daemons, get a listing of all the daemons, and then I'm going to enable that to be started when the system reboots. I'm then going to get it to restart the MongoDB, and give it a little while, because sometimes if you do it too quickly, it will say that there's an error, but I'm just going to wait, and hopefully we now see that I've got this active running. And it's using this command to start it and this config file. So you can go in and modify things there. So at a minimum, you can then just use that to start storing your logs. So you need to go get Greylog, install that, and it will store the logs in that database. So it'll be able to handle a lot more requests for that. What we want to do is to add some searching capability. Remembering the slide this morning, we want to do that search and correlation of the information. And so we're going to install Elasticsearch to be able to do that. And that's going to be our next part, is to install Elasticsearch. So I'm going to change into my root directory, which I already am. I'm using the wget command to go off to a website to grab the installation key. And I'm going to save it as a simple file called my_key. That is just a public key. So if I go cat my_key, that is the contents of it. It's just a public key to be able to create a trust relationship for that. I'm going to add that key to my trusted sources. And then I'm going to use that key to then tell my system to go do updates. But I need to go into my sources.list.d and create a text file that essentially just has this in it. Where to go get Elasticsearch install files from. Now that I've done that, I can update, get a listing of all the available software, and then tell it to go and download and install that. So that's going to take a little while, so I'll let you start your installations. So make sure you get MongoDB installed and Elasticsearch, and then we'll move on to Greylog. Let me know if you need anything.